update. And what we're seeing is, I think, a little more of the same. The pattern is continuing with the number of new listings and combined with price drops becoming the pattern, with more than usually about, this is about 1,400, and we put 400, we sold 499 and put 746 under contract. So the pattern seems to be the same. The Collier and Lee a little bit different, but still, if you take a look at the number of new listings and solds that are coming into the market, it's pretty obvious that we're building inventory and building opportunities for buyers, which is a good sign. The month supply we'll see in a minute is coming up close to over 3, so we're building back toward a balanced market. So we can now look at Collier for July. There we go. Everybody can see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So again, we need to talk a little bit about median prices, which actually are coming down. When we're comparing them to last year, it's a little misleading to see the number of increases there, because if you look at sales down 46%, we're looking at, number 349 or 48 as the middle, and with less sales comes more fluctuation in the median price. But overall, if I looked at it last month and this month, the median prices are trending down a little bit, but not cataclysmically down, just down a little bit, because the mix of inventory is changing. If you've been out in the market looking for a property that's under 300,000, you probably have some fairly limited selections, and so everything is shifted up as we sold a lot of that property out last year, and now the lowest prices are a little bit higher than they were last year. So we're still seeing an upward shift in the median, but the rate of increase we'll see on the next couple slides. The rate of increase is definitely decreasing. Days on market still down a little bit, but it's going to flip. We noticed days on market between May and June of 21 dropped from 57 to 25, and now we're going to start to see it come back up. And that's because we have more inventory on the market and more opportunities and less sales. So the combination of those things gives you a situation where days on market will start to rise. A little disappointing in new listings, down 19%. But again, if you look at the number of price reductions, which I probably should also add to this slide, the number of price reductions is really offsetting the fact that we don't have quite as many new listings as last year. But look at pendings. Pending is our forward look at the next 45 to 60 days, down 14%. And look at the inventory numbers, building steadily, up nearly 50% from last year. 2.5 months overall, single family up over 3, and condos climbing again from really under 1 a few months ago to up to almost 2. So the message is clear. We're in a shift, but not necessarily a bad shift. A shift toward a more balanced market, more opportunities for buyers. Are sellers able to claim the once in a lifetime prices that we saw in many neighborhoods? Probably not, because we were seeing such scarce inventory. We're seeing some of the unique pricing in some of the neighborhoods, get up above what really the market would bear. And as soon as we started seeing more inventory, more competition come onto the market, we started seeing price decreases. So that's Collier from July. Let's look at the graphs. Share screen. Collier. So now we start to look at it graphically. Can you see that okay? I might be able to make it a little bit bigger. That better?
Yeah,
this-
that's better. Thank you.
Collier County for the comparison of the last 15 months from May of 21 to July of 22. And the light green bar is the properties that are available for sale in the county. And the dark green bar is sales. And then you have your two lines, which are the blue new listings and pendings. So you're starting to see inventory increasing, pendings and sales decreasing. One of the things that we've seen this summer for the first time since 2019 is seasonality. Remember in 20 and 21, many people couldn't go home because they were locked out. Canada was shut down, international travel was restricted. And then beginning this year, things seemed to open up and a lot of people went on vacation or back to their northern neighborhoods for the first time in a couple of years. So you started to see it dramatically in the traffic that you see on the roads and in the restaurants. And now you're starting to see it in the number of sales. So we're kind of returning a little bit to our seasonal patterns, which do tend to be a little bit down in the summer, but then they tend to ramp up again in September, October, and November. So we really are in a situation where we're in a summer seasonal lull a little bit. Properties, we're still seeing more new opportunities come on the market in the form of new listings or price reductions. And overall, we're starting to see inventory climb. And you can see that the market analysis is we're going back to a neutral market where sales and new additions are being more balanced. So all in all, not all shifts are bad. And I think the one thing, I just listened to Lawrence Yun last week, and I've listened to Brad O'Connor, who's the Florida version of Lawrence Yun. Nobody sees a bubble or a drastic reduction in prices. They do see a leveling off that's going to be created by more inventory and less of these high prices set by no inventory. So overall prices are moderating, but not tumbling. We're starting to see in the previous chart a little bit more flexibility in negotiations. We were seeing 100, 102. Now we're seeing 97, 98. So we're still seeing selling on average close to list price, but with some flexibility being added. So if you're working with a buyer, you have a little bit of room for negotiations. If you're working with a seller, setting their expectations that when we have the price right and we have fish in the sea like Denny's chart, we're getting showings and offers, there may be a little nibbling going on. And, you know, remember to the seller that says, I want to sell this and buy something else. Remember the watchword, the market that you sell in is the market you buy in. So even though they may be getting a little bit less for their home, they're probably able to buy their next home for a little bit less. Any questions or comments so far? All righty then. Let's go to the next chart, which is kind of interesting. This is a little different slice on things. Again, showing you can see median prices while still trending up, they're flattening quite a bit, still up over last year. But the month supply calculation here is based on closed sales, not on active listings. So it's a little bit different calculation, but you see that the month supply is climbing. And you see also the month supply of homes and the inventory line are starting to intersect, which they haven't done since sometime, last year. So that's a good sign. The prices are moderating. Still a seller's market, but we're going to trend toward a flatter price curve and more inventory. These are all posted on the Facebook page last week, right around the time of the sales meeting. And if any of you want any of these charts, please just email me, jonesnaples@kw, and I'll be glad to send them individually to you. All right, let's look at Lee. Let's look at Lee in July, not January. All right, so Lee County, a little bit healthier market, I think, there, because we're seeing median prices up, but sales down significantly, although not as significantly as we saw in Collier. New listings up a little bit, pendings up a little bit, which is our predictor of the next 45 to 60 days. So we're starting to see sales increases being generated out in the future months. Look at inventory up, not quite as significantly as Collier, but still over 2 months supply. Condos coming back up 33%. Sales still down, not as radically as we saw in Collier. And look at your list to sell price, getting a little bit more toward, maybe there's a 1 or 2 points of negotiating room between the list price and the sell price. All right. Days on market still trending down, but I think we'll see that invert in the next couple months. Okay, as we start to see the Lee numbers here, look at the dramatic increase in properties available for sale in the last 2 and 3 months. Sales declining. Again, we have a seasonality factor in Lee also. New listings declining a little bit, but not a lot. And endings looking like they're flattening out and starting back up a little bit. So again, still a seller's market, but sellers are having to face competition. And really we're back to a skills-based market where the initial list price that you agree on with your new listing, really much more important to make sure that we get that number right than before, where we had some wiggle room because of lack of supply. So if you're working on pricing with a customer and they're still back 6 months ago, you need to show them what's happened to the market, and also that they need to be competitive in their neighborhood or their days on market's going up. And depending upon their motivation, you can always go to motivation and say, you know, how quickly do you want to be in that new neighborhood, or how quickly do you want to move back to so-and-so, or how quickly do you want to buy your next investment property? The speed at which the market is moving is matching on both sides. So we're starting to see a little decline, moderation in pricing. It's happening on both sides of the transaction. So one more chart. Here's the Lee month supply. And again, look at how the median price curve is flattened. The last 3 months, it's been the same. Well, we continue to increase inventory. And again, this is the number of closed sales divided into the amount of inventory. So it's a little different calculation, but it's consistently showing a significant rise in inventory over the last 3 months, and a flattening of the price appreciation curve. So Lee County, a little bit different. Obviously, if you think about what's happened here, price appreciation and lack of inventory maybe has driven some people up into Lee County that were otherwise considering Collier County. So for those of you working with buyers, I think it's important for you to understand the differences in these markets and the opportunity that may be available in Lee because of more supply and because of a slightly more moderate pricing to a buyer that otherwise would, started their search in Naples. All right. Are there any questions or comments on the statistics? Any surprises?
I guess what I'm looking at is now is original is priced to sale price ratio.
That's changing. You know, there's no question that competition always has an impact on list to sell. And those that are more motivated tend to be a little bit more flexible with the pricing. And also, we talked a little bit about the reluctance of some buyers because of the interest rates. Again, in Collier, we still have a dramatically different 70%, 65 to 70% cash. So we're not quite as impacted by interest rates as maybe we are in other markets, but still they're historically low. I did read a pretty good article. We might have talked about this in past calls. That how we got from 2.8 or 2.5 to 5.0, 5.1 is the Fed is no longer selling treasuries and buying mortgage-backed securities to insert liquidity into the market. And they did that for quite a while. And now we're looking at inflationary tendencies, and we're also dealing with the investors being the ones that are funding the mortgage market. And they're not obviously very interested in 2 and 3% mortgage rates. So while no one is predicting they're going to skyrocket, everybody that I can read is predicting that they're going to maybe drop a little bit, but maybe go up to the mid fives. But nobody is that I can read is forecasting that they're going to continue to increase. But a lot can be, you know, affected by the economy and inflation and what happens to long-term bond rates and return rates. But at this point in time, everybody feels like we've kind of leveled off maybe around 5 to 5.5. So
I worked with some buyers not too long ago, and they decided to go with an adjustable rate mortgage and that they may refinance in the future if the rates go down.
So I'm not a big banker on their going back down into the threes, but you know, it's just going to depend. Obviously, the refinance market has dried up completely, and many of the mortgage companies are facing some significant layoffs, including Keller Mortgage. But you know, that's because the activity is related to how much a mortgage broker, mortgage agent can make. And as the refinances go away and the mortgage rates rise, there's less people writing mortgages. And I think I read the stats that come out of the Mortgage Trade Association as being down substantially over the last 90 days. So we'll see what happens. Another point that I saw that I thought was pretty good to share with you is that if you're a seller and you're looking to make a deal, why not buy the rate down for a buyer by 1 point? Changes their picture over 30 years or 15 years, rather than say, I'll give you $5,000 in closing costs. So there may be some creativity that is creeping back into the seller's strategy. And maybe that's one of the things that can make a buyer a little more comfortable. I was on the Denny Grimes, Kristen Cole call a couple of weeks ago. And she said, if you have buyers nibbling along and expressing interest, but not willing to pull the trigger, maybe you, the seller, and the seller's agent can get together and make an offer to the buyer. Novel idea. Seller puts forward what they want and where they are willing to negotiate. Buyer now has a picture of what the seller will accept. So all shifting conditions require shifting strategies. And obviously, I think plays a little bit into our hands because we're skilled agents and we're trying to use our skill and our training and our understanding to help buyers and sellers reach their goals. Whereas before, the lack of inventory and the pricing pretty much was driven by the fact that there weren't very many fish in the sea, and people that were, I think there was more desperation maybe in 2020 and 2021 that said, I really need to find a house here and I need to to try to make a buy now before prices skyrocket. And I don't think they really ever did skyrocket, other than in certain neighborhoods where a seller would say, well, my neighbor just sold for 1.2, I'll go on for 1.6. Well, that 1.6 isn't realistic anymore. And I think that's driving the market right now. Anybody else want to comment? Kristen, I noticed you put a nice contract through here. What did you see in your transaction?
Well, mine is a new build, so, I mean, really the only thing I can kind of comment on that is we came in 30 under appraisal.
And you're able to get it.
Yep.
Okay. There are some, obviously a lot of the new building out in the estates and smaller community that was done on spec. And the spec might be, the specs may not be being absorbed as quickly as they were. So maybe there's builders that are willing, as you point out, willing to make a little bit of a deal. Again, supply and demand, and I don't know how many of you are getting emails from builders saying, hey, remember me, friend? The ones that I cut you to 1% the last 2 years. Well, we love you again, and we want you to bring customers. So you can start to see by the tone of their emails that they're much more interested in doing business with us, I think, than they were. So that's pretty much the report on the economic situation. The shift is on, and in the shift is maybe a little more stability, but a little more of a challenge. Things are going to take longer to sell. It's going to take some innovative marketing and negotiating skills to get deals to come together. And so that's where we're at. All right, let me shift gears here a little bit. And let's talk a little bit about, I think we'll finish off the questions. That everybody seemed to like that. Several people that watched the recording for last week's meeting and said that they really liked those questions. So I'm going to bring those back up again here, and let's finish them off. Then I have a few things that I think we can go through and talk about in the way of current situations with contracts. Can everybody see those okay? Yes?
Could you make them a little bit bigger?
A little bit bigger? How about that?
Perfect.
Okay, so I think we got down to question, I want to say we talked about HOAs and condos a little bit. Let's go back to when is an HOA disclosure required, and what happens if not supplied with the contract? Okay, an HOA disclosure for each homeowners association relating to the sale is required, and you need a separate HOA disclosure for each HOA. And you might have two HOAs where you have an HOA for the local subdivision and an HOA for the master community. Twin Eagles might be a good place the Twin Eagles master runs the golf course and all the amenities, and the individual HOAs inside of Twin Eagles, there's condos and HOAs. They have their own HOA. And in many cases, they collect the money and then pay it to the HOA, but you still need an HOA disclosure for each one. If it's not supplied with the contract, then there's a situation where the buyer really has a kind of a get out of jail free card, because if it's not supplied timely with the contract, the HOA disclosure is the buyer can trigger a 3-day contract review cycle if not supplied timely with the contract, like within with the contractor within, let's say, a day of the contract. So if you have a buyer and you never got an HOA disclosure signed, and your buyer decides, "No, I'd rather buy another place," they have an immediate ability to say, "Hey, you didn't give me the HOA, I'm going to trigger my 3-day right of review, and in that 3 days, I can cancel if I'd like." So, what is the effect on the contract if the information supplied is incorrect? Okay, so if the HOA name is spelled incorrectly, or the fees that are listed on the form are not correct and not current or off by a few dollars, again, the buyer has the same leverage under the HOA statute that I didn't supply the correct information. Therefore, my buyer can trigger a 3-day right of review and an exit from the contract. So you have to be careful with that. I always suggest, and when you're taking the listing, that you get the current HOA bill from the seller and make sure you use that current data. It's risky going to the MLS and say, well, that's what the other listing shows. Every fall, new budgets are agreed upon and voted in, and usually the first of the year, sometimes the third quarter, depending upon the fiscal year of the HOA, new rates go in effect. And if you have the old rates and send a seller's disclosure over for the old rates, you could be exposing your seller to a buyer's exit strategy. So be careful with that. When is a condo disclosure required? Also, how do you determine whether the residence is located in an HOA or condo association? Well, there really isn't a condo disclosure. If the word condominium is in the legal description for the property, then that's your trigger that it's a condo. If it says HO or it doesn't say anything, then it's either a standalone property or it's in a homeowners association, but you can't really tell that definitively by the legal description. A condo you can. I think that some properties before 1980, 82, 83 could be condos and not have the legal description with the condo in it. So if you got an older property, you may need to verify by other means whether you're in a condo or HOA association. However, in the neighbor world, there is no condo rider. What we require is that the listing agent hopefully supplies the 7 documents to the buyer's agent and on to the buyer for a 3 business day review period. We've not agreed to supply a condo rider with the neighbor contract. We'd rather see the documents because that's what the statute requests. Far Bar has a condo rider and it has quite a bit more information in it. It also has the ability for the buyer to sign and say, I've already received the docs. I don't need my 3-day right of review. And Mark is not, I think he's left, but he did point out that when there were multiple offer situations, that the seller would often ask the buyer to submit their 3-day right of review with the contract so that they couldn't turn around and use their 3-day. So you go through a multiple offer situation with 10 or 12 offers. You select an offer on the basis that it's the best, and then all of a sudden the buyer gets out on a 3-day right of review. So he does suggest in some cases that you go ahead and ask the buyer to say, I've reviewed the documents and I'm good before you accept the contract. Kind of an interesting twist. May not be quite as popular an idea with a little more inventory out there and less multiple offer situations, but just a thought. How are special assessments addressed in the contract and whose responsibility is to pay? Okay, special assessment in this particular context is a condo or HOA special assessment. The Far Bar contract separates municipal assessments from condo and HOA assessments. So in the body of the FAR bar contract, they're strictly talking about municipal, governmental assessments. An example would be the water and sewer systems in Cape Coral, or Bonita had a water and sewer assessment. So those are assessments that are usually generally passed on to the buyer, unless the buyer requests that they be paid before closing, or they are as a checkbox that says, I want to, the seller will pay everything up to closing and the buyer will pay after. When it comes to HOA or condo assessments, in FAR bar, those are addressed with the HOA rider or the condo rider. And again, a similar language. Is the seller going to pay these assessments prior to closing? Are they going to be paid up to closing and the buyer picks up everything afterwards? There again, that's how you want to negotiate. And if you are representing a seller and you're in a community that has multiple special assessments, many of the golf communities they'll have 5 or 6 assessments, one for the clubhouse, one for the pickleball courts, one for the health club, one for, redoing the golf course greens. So if you're representing a seller, you have to be careful, especially under the NABOR contract, which specifies that the seller will pay all outstanding assessments prior to closing. So if you've got that, you want to make sure you negotiate with your buyer and say, look, it's a condition of this contract that you're going to pick up all these monthly assessments after closing. If you don't do that, the seller could get hit with a pretty big bill. And so be careful with that, and be careful you understand by either learning from the seller or contacting the property manager or the association itself and knowing all the ins and outs of the assessments. Pending special assessments are another case here. And what's a pending special assessment? That's an assessment that is voted on and decided on after the effective date of the contract. So these get to be very sticky, because if there was no disclosure, if the seller was aware there was an assessment coming and didn't disclose it to the buyer does have some rights to ask the seller in the NABOR contract to pay everything over 1% of the pending special assessment. So know your assessments, know if there's anything coming on the books, and the best source of that is the property manager or the HOA or condo association. Feel free to chime in with any questions.
I have a question, Jeff. If you are looking to get that information on the assessments or pending assessments, would that be in the budget, or you just have to trust that the property manager is knowledgeable and truthful?
Well, you can, generally there's something usually in the minutes.
Okay.
An assessment that's coming up. So I guess theoretically you could ask to see the minutes, but I would say the majority of time when you call a property manager, the large property management company breaks it down into specialists that serve only certain communities. I would say generally they're pretty knowledgeable, and you can call them, but you kind of have to make that call, because there's a lot of fine print in this. I was working last year with a buyer. I don't work with too many of them, but I do occasionally. And the many of the HOAs in that community or condo associations had tried to restrict rentals by saying each new buyer, I sign a thing saying I can't rent the place for 1 year or 2 year or 3 years. And it's in the fine print, wasn't disclosed in the MLS listing, but they're right above the signature of the buyer for the condo approval. It says, I agree that I will not rent my place for 3 years after contract. Well, that wasn't in the Q&A. It wasn't anywhere in the information of the listing. It wasn't anywhere except that one line right above the buyer's application for membership. So you got to do your homework. I mean, in this particular case, it did not kill the deal, but it could have, because there was in the MLS, it said, here's how many times a year you can rent. And in the rules and regs, there was nothing mentioned about restricting the new buyer from when they could rent. So it's sticky stuff. And the more you do your homework, once your buyer zeroes in on a community, the more your benefit you're going to be by giving them the information that they need to make a decision. But when you go to contract and this stuff pops up and the buyer goes, well, I plan on renting my place for next season, and this says I can't rent for 2 years. So it's sticky, and it's important that you, as the buyer's agent, make sure you try to do as much as you can to figure this stuff out. And as the seller's agent, I had one listed a while back, and it was like 1 year, no new buyer could lease their place for 1 year. And I put it right in the confidential remarks. I put it in the documents and the rules and regs that were put out there. And, this was back in the heyday of 2020 and 21, I think it was 2020, when this place had 15 showings in the first week. And, then it would be like, okay, I'm getting ready to submit a contract. And I'd say, well, just confirm, in your remarks that the buyer cannot rent this place for a year. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, it was in the confidential remarks, it was in the rules and regs, but yet there were several contracts that got submitted that we sent back saying, hey, you've got to show in here where your buyer's agreeing that they can't rent for a year. So even that, if you are diligent and put it into your remarks and try to make sure people understand that, it's sometimes the fine print that can get you. Here's a beauty. What is the financing contingency, and how does financing affect the proceedings of the contract? Okay, well, especially with interest rates climbing from, the 2s and 3s to 5s, the financing contingency is basically saying, if I'm not unable as a buyer to get a loan for X number of years at X rate, then I'm able to cancel the contract and get my money back. So obviously in the days of multiple offers, 10 or 12 offers, financing contingencies were kind of frowned on by sellers because they said, I'd really rather have somebody that was willing to pay cash. Now we're starting to see, during the shift in the market, sellers are happy to have offers, even if they have financing contingencies in them. And I'm going to go through that paragraph this afternoon and talk to you a little bit about what I think your responsibility is to work out with your buyer if you're going to use a financing contingency. And any financing contingency will have certain protections for the buyers if they aren't able to get a loan or a loan to their satisfaction. All right. Number 18, what about video and audio camera systems in the residence, and how should they be handled with the seller and buyers viewing the residence? Okay, this is an interesting question. A couple of years ago, we added to the MLS a warning at the bottom of every page saying audio and video recording devices may be in use. Conversations should not be considered private. Well, you can go down to your friendly local appliance store or Amazon, and you can buy a camera that records audio and video inexpensively. So many sellers are like, well, I got this fancy device and I'm gonna be able to see what's happening during the showings. Maybe not such a great plan, but it is happening, and you need to ask your seller when you're taking the listing contract if they have these systems and if they're planning on using them. Video recordings are kind of a safe haven because the average person, I'm told, gets videoed 30 or 40 times a day, and when they go out into the real world and go into shopping centers or workplaces or parking lots. So video camera surveillance is not considered as significant as audio. Audio, in the laws of the state of Florida, require that both parties consent to an audio recording. It's like when we record the Zoom, we let you know before we record it that it's being recorded. And so any comments you make or what you say on the recording will be recorded. So, it's an advance warning. There's a little tent card you can get at the neighbor store that says, audio and visual recording devices, may be in use in this restaurant, in this residence. And you're really supposed to post that somewhere. However, the bottom line is more and more people are using surveillance systems. So if you're working with a buyer, suggestion is you caution them that the seller may be recording or videoing your showing. So if they have questions or they have comments about the residence, let's do those once we get back in the car and not while we're walking through the home where the seller could overhear you. And maybe that would become a negotiating issue for them when you start to submit your offer. So there was apparently a court case that was reviewed at Florida Realtors back in January. We used to say that audio was really a problem and that the seller needed to understand that audio recordings could be illegal if they're not approved by the buyer. There was a court case that had to do with I think it was an appraiser who was recorded during the appraisal process. And I guess there were some statements he made on the audio that turned out to be a little bit controversial, and that it may have affected the appraisal or the things he was observing. And the seller called him on it. And the appraiser sued, saying, you didn't have my permission to record. And the court said, you're an appraiser or a real estate agent or something like that. And you should have the reasonable expectation that when a residence is for sale or for evaluation, that recordings might not be a violation of your rights. So that was a kind of a landmark case in that most of the prior cases we had where there was audio recordings, there was liability on the part of the person who was recording the audio without notifying the people that were being recorded. So is there a little bit less teeth in the audio side of surveillance? Yes, but it's always a good idea, as I say, if you have a seller that plans to use these techniques, make sure you have some kind of a disclosure or a tent card at your open house that says, hey, there could be surveillance systems in use. You're working with a buyer, you just want to firmly establish up front that, hey, what we say inside the home, it could be recorded and could possibly cause some issues for you in negotiations. So that's, I think, the best I can do on that subject, but it has been added to the listing contract. The seller is agreeing by signing the listing contract that if they're going to use these devices, that they're using them at their own risk and not at the broker's risk. So that's been added to the listing contract. And again, in MLS, we've added the warning at the bottom of all the buyer printouts to say, hey, audio and visual recording could be in use. So try to build that into your routine when you're working with buyers or when you're taking a listing, that you pretty much become aware if the seller's planning on using that type of equipment, that you disclose it. What are defective items versus cosmetic items? And what is the seller's responsibility to repair? I'm pretty sure the last couple of weeks, we've gone through the defective versus cosmetic chart. And I emailed it, I think, to a number of you that were on that. But that being said, if you haven't got that chart and you like it, just message me and I'll send it to you. It's just a one-pager We can take a quick look at it. It's not difficult to find. So, but it is kind of maybe something you might want to have in your repertoire, because it's a quick reference when you get an inspection report. If it's this one. Yeah. So many of you have seen this before, but these are the lines in the NABOR contract that deal with inspections, buyer's election, seller's response. Systems and equipment shall be deemed in working condition of operating in the manner designed to operate. And you can kind of go through this and see that we're referring to all of the things where working condition is a criteria for cosmetic versus defective. Seawalls, docks, and pool lanai enclosures shall be in working condition if structurally sound. Seller shall not be obligated to take remedial action or grant a credit of remedial action when they're deemed to be in working condition. So I had one the other day. I get a lot of these calls because there's constantly buyers are requesting repairs from the seller, and the seller's like, what, do I really have to repair this? So this was a case where there was some condensation and light, what the inspector said, light, he didn't use the M word. He just said light dirt on the filter and everything. And but the air conditioner is working, cooling according to spec. When an air conditioner generally is measured, they put a temperature measurement device in the plenum, and they try to determine what the difference is between the outside air, or the air in the room, and the air inside the plenum of the air conditioner. And that's called a differential. And that differential is by spec so many degrees. So if the system is not cooling to that, and there's a significant difference between the spec and the and what the inspector measures, that could be considered a defective condition. But if they're saying, well, the ductwork is a little dirty, or the air conditioning filter looked like it hadn't been changed in a while, that's not a defective condition. Can the buyer ask the seller to service the air conditioner, and can the seller agree? Yes. But is it required? No. Then we get down into roof, interior and exterior doors, walls, foundation, swimming pool shall be in working condition if structurally sound, watertight, and free from wood rot. We added wood rot a couple of years ago because many of the exterior doors that come out of garages and out of lanais onto the decking, they're made of a somewhat inexpensive compressed wood, and they get moisture in them and they tend to rot. So we added wood rot. So even if the door's open and closing, but it has some rot at the bottom of it or on the side, it's considered defective. Seawalls, docks, and pool if structurally sound, okay? Seller shall not be obligated to take remedial action or grant a credit in lieu of remedial action. So now we got down the last paragraph, which specifically defines cosmetic conditions. And this is where we see a lot of requests from buyers to sellers because the inspector listed it in their report. So if there's a crack in the garage floor, but there's no difference in the level, or there's no big space in there where water and moisture can get in, then it's cosmetic. This just in, most homes in Florida are built on sand, and as they settle, cracks appear. Now, if they're not significant structural cracks, but they're just surface cracks, cosmetic. So you have to remember that you can go back to this list and point it back out to your buyer. But if you're the listing agent, and it's good stuff to have. Missing or torn screens. Have the buyer, please have the seller repair the torn screens on the lanai and replace the 3 missing screens on the back windows. Sorry, cosmetic. Nail holes, scratches, dents, chips, caulking, pitted pool surfaces, minor cracks in windows, driveways, sidewalks, tile and lanai and patio floors. Caulking is another one that, the inspector will say, the caulking around the bathtub is kind of worn away. Have the seller caulk, nope, sorry, that's cosmetic. Now, if the seller has a handyman going out there to do a few other things that are defective, maybe you want to do those things, but they're not required. So what does all this say? Let's take a little step back, fly up to 10,000 feet here. All this says is that these are working conditions that are defined by the contract that's designed to keep the playing field level between the seller and the buyer. So you as the agent need to understand and explain to your buyers and sellers what this playing field looks like and why there's some give and take in there, but there's not a situation where the buyer can say, I'm paying top dollar for this place. I'm paying over list price. I want this fixed. I want the screens replaced. I want the nail holes patched. That's not a level playing field. And if you're the agent for the buyer and the buyer says, I want all this submitted to the agent, but possibly you want to try to counsel with the buyer to say, look, there's some give and take in here. And if we create a situation where now we send stuff over and the seller is completely disgusted with all the things you've asked for, which are minor and cosmetic in nature. Hey, wait a minute, this place is not brand new, or it is brand new and there's a few dings in it. That's part of the buying process. And so I urge you as an agent for either side to try to use some moderation and be in a situation where you work together to try to work these things out, because otherwise they can become stumbling blocks and sources of irritation for either side. And that's never very good when things deteriorate over the caulking of the bathtub. So that's my comments on that. Again, that little blurb was put together to try to maintain peace in the negotiations. So the last question, what are closing costs and whose responsibility is it to pay for each item? So in both contracts, there are paragraphs that say seller's expenses and buyer's expenses. And I think we've talked about the title app that comes from our title company that can be used to do a seller net sheet and a buyer net sheet. And I think that's really important regardless of the side that you're on, because it's a good way to let the seller know or the buyer know exactly what their net is. Let's see if I have app loaded. I can bring it up there. Okay, here it is. So there's an app that I think we've gone through a few times, and it's called TA Access One. You can get it from the Title Alliance website, and I believe you can get it from the Apple or Android store. But we'll just briefly look at this because it's kind of cool. Trying to load this up here for you. So if you're working with a buyer early on in the process, when they start to look at homes, it's really important that they understand not only how much the mortgage is going to be, But how much the insurance is gonna be, how much the property taxes are gonna be, how much maintenance, ongoing maintenance is required in the, you know, if there's a lawn service required, or if the condo association or HOA is providing that. Okay, let's see if I have some estimates in there. Nope, no estimates found, okay. All right, so I'm gonna go back here and do a new share. There it is. Okay, so we'll go through this quickly. You can play with this by loading this website. So let's say we have a buyer, and let's say the buyer's going to do a conventional, and it's going to be 865,000. Everybody see this okay? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to put 20% down. We're doing a conventional mortgage. And the interest rate is 5.1. We got a little better rate, 30 years. Anything miscellaneous in there, like a transfer fee or an assessment? We can do hazard insurance at 1.5%, or I urge you here to call your insurance agent at some point in time and make sure you understand and the buyer understands the costs of this insurance. So let's say we get a quote of $2,500 a year. You can put in dollars. Taxes estimated at 1.2%, but you can get those taxes off of the MLS listing, right? If there's an HOA and it's annual or it's monthly or quarterly, let's say it's annual and it's 4,800. Bless you. And we're going to close on September. Let's close on October. Come on, Junior.
Jeff, does that HOA say 48,000?
It does, and that's my mistake. Thank you for catching that. That would have made the payment a little high.
Yeah.
I think I already hit the calculate. There, here we go. So let me go back here. Change this to 4,800. Okay, now we'll compute it. Okay, so this produces a nice little sheet. Okay, and it basically says, here's how much you have to come up with to close, and here's your monthly payment. Now, if you're providing that information to your buyer, chances are the first time you provide it for them, you might have to have the CPR paddles available because sometimes it's a shock. But this is, you know, then they say, well, I can't put that much down. I only want to put 10% down. I can go back easily and I can go through this and I can recompute it and get, you know, different answers for what it's going to take. So now we put less down. We have a lot less to bring to closing, and our monthly payment went up. I can click this button and I can get a complete detail for the buyer of all the closing costs. So you can see that, and again, this is usually not something a buyer thinks about. Oops, sorry, wrong button. It's not something that a buyer thinks about, but it's important because all of a sudden now, look at what they're talking about 14 months of insurance, 4 months of taxes, 15 days of interest. Here's your owner's title policy, assuming that the buyer's paying. Title endorsement, and then, you know, every lender has a title policy on their loan. And there's an origination fee in here that may not be true. Miscellaneous lender fees, doc stamps. In most cases, the seller pays the doc stamps on the sale, but the buyer still has to pay the doc stamps on the mortgage and the intangible taxes. Right? And they're getting a rebate from the seller because the day of closing belongs to the buyer, but the seller has to pay the real estate taxes up to and including October 13th. So I'm just saying to you that I think that having a tool like this is important. And you can, come on, there we go. You can get this pretty easily by downloading the app. It's free. I invested in the premium just to show you that you can, if you do the premium, which is $9 a year, I went all out. You can get some premium reports that you can send to your sellers and buyers, and with your name and your personalization on it, that are pretty nice. Okay. So this is a nice tool. There's a number of them on the internet that you can get, but it's interesting. You can kind of set your prorations up and your defaults up so that they do, you know, what you want to do for them. So that's just a few minutes on having a buyer or seller. There's all these calculators you can use, but you can also do a seller net sheet. And again, we're trying to figure out on our $865,000 house. There's the commissions, right? Any repairs that might need to be done, property taxes, loan balance. In Remine, if you're familiar with how to use that, in Remine, it will go out and look up the loan amount and figure out the amount left. But let's say we've owned this house for a couple of years and we had 3.65 and we owe 500,000. Okay, now I can come here and I can compute. So this is another nice tool to have with your listing appointment, is to have a seller net sheet. So this is another one. You can get some nice reports here, but you can show the seller what they can expect to have in their pocket after paying closing costs. And again, you can get the detail of those closing costs. But I think this is an important thing for, here's your commissions, interest, and the doc stamps on the purchase and the closing charge to the title company. So when you're talking about pricing on a listing appointment and you're talking about, you know, exactly what the seller's expecting, this way you can help them maybe have some of this there with your listing appointment. If we have to put any repairs in. So this is basically prorating the taxes and the closing costs. Let's see if I can. So if you do this, Mark Benson is back. So if you do this premium with for the $9 a year, you got all these reports you can print and you can send these to the seller. You can see I got my beautiful face there and my firm name and all of my information. And I can now give this to the seller, and it's a nice report. Here are some of the other reports that I could produce and send to the seller. And, you know, I think it's a nice tool. I think it's important that you establish that you know what the game is at a certain selling price. And you can decide, you know, which one of these reports you like, and provide them. There's a number of different ones here that some are a little fancier than others. But, you know, just showing you can do buyer and seller reports that will help you to communicate at a listing appointment, or when a buyer gets serious about making an offer. You know, I think that it's important that you look at this or a similar tool to work with sellers at listing appointments or buyers at the time before you write the offer. Now, the market is not so frenetic as it used to be, so you have a little time. And one of the messages that I can give you from being part of the Florida Realtors Insurance Committee, and being having more information about the sad state of homeowners insurance in Florida, you really need to look out for some of these costs in advance, if you can, of making the offer. You can call an insurance agent, and we can give you some contacts. But you can now call an insurance agent and get a homeowner's quote and a flood quote, you know, in 30 minutes. So, or however long it takes them to run it and call you back. So what I'm encouraging you to do is to try to do as much of your homework up front. Generally, a buyer in this market is not going to make an offer the first time they see a house. You might take them out on a showing appointment. You might start to zero in on a neighborhood or a particular house. At that point in time, you can start to do a little bit of advanced research. You can start to produce some buyer net sheets that'll give them an idea of what their costs are. And, you know, in terms of insurance, okay, this can have a dramatic effect on affordability. Some of these homeowner quotes and some of the complications based on the age of the roof and the inspector's report can be significant. So I encourage you to be out front and try to get as much of this information for the buyer before you even put your offer in. Any comments or questions on this? Does
No,
that
I
help?
just bought the premium, Jeff.
Pardon?
I just purchased that $9 premium.
$9, you know.
Yeah. Woo-hoo!
I think it's a little more professional. You can go in there and edit your profile and put a bunch of stuff in, but that's a nice thing to have. I think would everybody agree that's a nice thing to have on a listing appointment?
Absolutely.
So you can go into Remine and get the approximate mortgage amount, and it will figure that, you know, the balance for you. So
I think RPR does that too. At least they used
Right.
to.
yeah. So, I mean, that's an important thing to get. You can save this estimate. You can email it, you can download it, you can do anything you want with it, but definitely for a buyer or seller, try to do this. It's part of building your trust with your customer. You know, if we look at, there was a little matrix that I think Jason Abrams did, you know, that, you know, what is important, you know, in building trust, and authenticity and accountability and logic are the three that are listed. And, you know, it's like one of those things where no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So you've got to build a level of trust with your buyer or seller as you're going along. And the more of this information you have, you know, it's like, what would you want to know if you were selling your house? Well, this is what I'd want to know. This is going to help me make the final pricing decision. This is going to help me decide, you know, what offer to make. So I think it's important, and hopefully this has, you know, been some useful information to you. I want to try one other thing here before we sign off, because I found some things here I want to discuss with you. I'm going to stop the share for a minute. Go back to the internet. I want to go to the contract real quick. I'm going to pick the NABOR contract, but it's also a FAR bar issue. So with the emphasis more on the cost of mortgages, I think there's a couple of things in these contracts that you need to consider when you're writing the contract. So I'm going to bring up the residential sales contract here. Hopefully. Share. Oh, there we are. Okay, so I'm going to shrink this down a little bit, but maybe not. Okay, so if I go to page 2 of this contract, and we're talking the financing contingency, okay? So if I'm checking the box here, let's talk about this paragraph for a couple minutes. Number one, it's important to decide, and it's important, obviously, you know, intuitively, that the buyer needs to get a hold of the mortgage person and have a mortgage partner early on in the process. A, to find out how much, what affordability is, and B, to find out what programs are available. Now, with the raise in interest rates, you know, there are other mortgage products that we haven't seen for a while, and they allow buyers to do some variable rate kind of mortgages, some different number of years, some periods where the interest rate's low and can accelerate over time. A lot of different products out there that may be more applicable to today's market than the traditional 30-year fixed, which we saw a lot of. But you know, there's a number of different products out there now that may make more sense. We talked a little bit earlier that we think interest rates may have stabilized around 5 to 5.5. So one of the things you do is you have to check the boxes for the type of loan that your buyer is looking for. And if they're looking for on line 60 an FHA or VA, there's an addendum that you need to attach that delineates to the seller some of the differences between the FHA VA and the conventional loan, right? So what I am recommending here is that if your customer is wanting to go VA or FHA, make sure you fill out that addendum and explain to the buyer exactly what has to happen. Because if you don't include that, the seller still has to sign off with the lender to the terms of VA and the terms of FHA. And it may be at some expense to the seller, and it may be that there's an appraisal contingency built in that will affect the buyer's ability to use the financing contingency. So be careful with that. And where I'm seeing, here's what I'm looking at a lot of contracts. On line 61, in the NABOR contract, there is no default. So what happens if I leave that blank? And my buyer is able to get a loan at 7.9%. We didn't protect the buyer for a situation where they're a second home buyer. The mortgage market for second home buyers is higher than primary home buyers. Maybe my credit's not the greatest in the world. Maybe the lender only has a program at 7% for me, and I put nothing in there. Can I still use the financing contingency to walk away? Because the lender is not going to write a letter saying I can't get a loan. The lenders maybe can say I can't get a loan below 7%. So if you leave that blank, you may be exposing, or your buyer may be exposing themselves to a situation where the mortgage product that they are able to qualify for is not to their liking and not to their, even though they might have the ability to make the payment, that doesn't mean that they want to pay that much or that they want those terms that they're getting for a second home or whatever. So be careful with that. And my guess is that your buyer has already worked with a lender and gotten hopefully a pre-approval letter, not a pre-qual letter, a pre-approval letter that says, I approve Mark Benson for a $650,000 loan at 5.2%. Okay, so if I put 5.5 in there, or 5.3 or whatever, and all of a sudden Mark starts going through his underwriting and the lender comes back and says, geez, Mark, I can't offer you that premium plan. Your rate's going to be 5.8. Well, Mark's going to say, well, wait a minute. Now I based all my decisions on 5.3, which is the program you told me I qualified for. Now can I get out? Absolutely. The product that I was offered exceeded the interest rate that I put there. So I think now that we've returned to a more of a sensitivity to mortgage rates and mortgage costs, that you have to be very careful with line 61. In FAR bar, it says it defaults to an interest rate based on the buyer's credit worthiness. What does that mean? I see people put MKT in their market. I see PREV prevailing. What does that mean? That means different things to different buyers, and I would be very careful as the trusted resource of a customer to leave that field to chance. And that's Broker Jeff's soapbox for the day. Really, it's something I'm starting to see on contracts coming through, and I obviously haven't seen one blow up over that yet, but I think it's an unnecessary risk not to put a calculated figure in there that protects your buyer in the event that a particular mortgage they don't qualify for the rate that they got their pre-approval for. And I think it's important.
Jeff, can I say something?
Sure.
So probably more for the benefit of people that are listening to this later, but that's why we have errors and omissions insurance. And I'm not sure, I may have mentioned this once before on one of these calls, but typically when there's an error made by an agent, that's the attorneys that represent the agent end up settling. And what do you think the magic amount is? It's usually the deductible on the insurance policy. So if you had for example, if there was a $10,000 deductible, that's the magic number where both parties come together.
Yeah, it's a case of using something that's become a much more important factor in affordability, leaving it up to teams. Bar, we talked about putting into the new contract a default based on the customer's credit worthiness, but what does that mean? It means that you can be locked into a mortgage that they don't want or have no original intent to pay for. All right, it's 2:58. And anybody else have anything they'd like to discuss today? Okay, well, thank you all. I appreciate your time, and I know we have quite a few people that look at this class afterwards. So for those of you that are watching afterwards, welcome. And again, if you have any questions, please email me, jonesnaples@KW. Happy to try to. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thanks for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.